In 2001, Team Eco released a PS2 classic, simply known as Eco. In the next 4 years, I would keep hearing about Eco's quality and must-play ability. By 2005, even though I didn't play Eco up to that point, I was ready to accept greatness. That year, while everyone was looking forward to the future, many gamers who had played and admired Eco from afar respectively were excited to hear about the North American release of the game's spiritual successor, Shadow of the Colossus. When I played Team Eco's latest work, I was ready to see what this great studio had to offer that I didn't experience 4 years prior. By the game's finale, I was left astounded and considered it one of the greatest games I had ever experienced. So color me excited in 2017 when it was announced a full remake of Shadow of the Colossus would be exclusively released on the PS4 that next year. Would this be another example of leaving well enough alone in the past? Or the proof that with the right care, greatness can be improved upon and rightfully exalted? I couldn't wait to find out that answer. Unlike Eco, Shadow of the Colossus doesn't feature minor enemies. As promoted time and time again before its release both in 2005 and now, the game is a series of boss battles, one intended to be more spectacular than the last. Following the opening scenes featuring a lone boy and his horse riding toward a castle standing out between the peaks of mountaintops, the player is taken into a temple. Inside, he lays down a large sheet holding the body of a deceased female. Crying to the heavens, he gets his answer as to how her life can be restored by going throughout the land and slaughtering 16 different colossi. From that moment on, the player is given the chance to control protagonist Wanderer and his trusty steed Agro as they venture forth to complete a task seemingly insurmountable. The reason one would think the duty of defeating a gigantic foe in this game is almost impossible is simply due to scale. Magnificently, the beast can be toppled through creative ways of climbing using the monster's fur or the environment or even both, before finding vulnerabilities to stab until each colossi finally tumbles in death. After accomplishing the feat of overcoming 16 mythical creatures over the course of 6 hours or so, I witnessed the journey's end. Yet there is actually more to Shadow of the Colossus than just the initial playthrough. After going through the game, the player is given an opportunity to test their skills through time attack mode, where the player has to beat the clock when slaughtering adversaries in hopes of attaining prizes both useful and odes to his predecessor Eco. For yours truly, the lone experience of conquering the unconquerable was enough on the PlayStation 2. But that didn't stop me from giving it another go when I purchased this version to topple the beast one more time, while taking pictures with the new photo mode, and attaining a variety of trophies for actions such as defeating the third colossi without breaking its wrist guard, or performing stunts while riding on Agro. Like Eco before it, Shadow of the Colossus has become one of the poster boys for the video games are art argument that has been going on for quite some time. One couldn't talk about Shadow without first mentioning how gorgeous it was both visually and orally in 2005. The PS2 version of Shadow was mostly minimalist in nature when it came to presenting the environment with a muted color scheme and mostly foggy expanse due to the draw distance limitations. That is not the case in the remake, as the world, though desolate of humanity, is captivating because of its beauty, from the sand dunes north of the starting temple to the waterfalls near one of the latter beasts' lair. And when it comes to the colossi themselves, these monstrosities are not only impressive in size, but also in action thanks to the detailed fur covering portions of their body, their expressive eyes that change color when enraged, and even their movements when Wanderer tries to hold on by the player's order, making for some hair-raising moments that might have a player clutching the controller a little tighter when Wander is flying through the air while hanging from the wing of a stone bird who was just resting on a ledge before its attacker showed up. There's a great reverence in the visual presentation of Shadow that improves upon almost every aspect of the original release. From a sound perspective, the mixing has noticeably been redone. The soundtrack, though somewhat minimal as well, has obvious differences relating to the Colossus themselves, as they are louder in their movements and groans of pain, with the prior giving hints when they are about to attack or want to shake Wanderer off like the annoying insect that he is compared to them. Unlike the graphics and sound, the story itself is unchanged, and still embraces the belief that less is more when it comes to the player's interpretation. But all the pretty visuals and sounds in the world can make a game something incredible if the gameplay isn't there. The singular focus of Shadow of the Colossus is to figure out the living puzzle of each beast and slay it in spectacular fashion, after using a sword to find the direction and riding aggro across the world that once felt huge, but has definitely shrunken in perspective thanks to such larger open worlds becoming the norm in the generations that followed its release. The way to complete the task of slaying a colossi mostly is entirely up to the player. Thanks to this piece of gaming freedom, players are given the chance to experiment and test the boundaries of what should have and could have been a very limiting experience. Very few colossi feel insignificant and not worthy of the game, though a few come across as misplaced, as they could have worked better earlier or later in the game depending on what monsters you're referring to, such as a dog-like beast that is afraid of fire. Depending on the difficulty level, colossi will vary in both strength and vulnerable points. Harder the difficulty, more stabbing spots on the colossi in both regular and time attack modes. The movements of Wander, Aggro, and their adversaries, be it climbing, running, dodging, or attacking, is just like it was in the original game, with a few minor improvements here and there. Like Wander taking less time to fall when stepping off the edge of a cliff, instead of the original Looney Tunes style near fall animation. While it still operates the same way as it did in the original, the depiction of Wander's health and stamina, the latter depleting when Wander grabs onto a colossi, only regenerating when letting go of whatever he's holding on to, has been modified to take up less of the screen and vanishes until in use or Wander takes a bad hit. When it came to the original and even the PS3 remaster, Shadow of the Colossus was hampered by frame rate drops that would leave Wander running, jumping, and even falling in slow motion. Thankfully, the game on PS4 is locked at 30 frames per second and never drops, even on the original PS4. But for all the improvements made, Shadow of the Colossus 2018 isn't perfect. The most glaring issue is the third-person camera still doesn't clip through solid objects. Shadow's camera issues can become incredibly problematic when platforming, be it around the world or, most importantly, when taking on one of the colossi. Though the camera issue varies from colossi to colossi, it's something they still haven't figured out how to properly fix when the answer is obvious. From a control perspective, the remake allows for players to use both a modernized version of the original control scheme, such as the X button being jump instead of the triangle button, or the one that PS2 players experienced a decade ago. But certain aspects of the controls are still the same no matter what you choose, such as having to hold down the grab button when Wander is climbing to a ledge or colossi while tapping the jump button to move upward in a faster motion if Wander has the chance. No matter the control style the player chooses, expect some growing pains during the first couple of beasts. And even veterans will have problems with muscle memory kicking in when playing the modern style. Like its PS2 and PS3 predecessors, Shadow of the Colossus the Remake is a flawed classic that mostly overcomes its original iteration's limitations, while fixing production issues that help realize the visual and aural potential of an experience that was once limited not by ingenuity, but the hardware it was made for over a decade ago. The PS2 version and eventually the PS3 HD remaster of Shadow of the Colossus is one of the most beautiful, both aesthetically and orally, experiences a gamer could have, but was hampered overall by hardware limitations. It would take some 12 years and 2 console generations for this game to finally reach its potential, as issues such as frame rate drops and dips in graphical quality are no more. Though there are still camera problems and a control scheme that can be a little bothersome for those who didn't play it when it first was released, or simply grew up in a time when developers tried to be as simplistic when mapping a control scheme as possible. Shadow of the Colossus, the PS4 version, is a shining example of a remake done right, by maintaining the base gameplay that left players in awe over a decade ago, not tampering with the minimalist story, and trying to improve upon the flaws from 2 generations ago. But no matter the amount of improvements made to this classic game, there's still a chance from a gameplay perspective it might not be the type of experience someone would want to have thanks to the downtime traveling across the virtual land and performing the same routine only against a different enemy. But it's so hard not to tell someone to try this game and attempt to slay a couple of colossi to see if it's worth continuing, because there's a great chance you'll get sucked into the world and the enormous duty thrust upon a nearly muted individual with a very bombastic soul. It was hard to deny just how monumental this game was in 2005. In 2018, this remake reasserts that Shadow of the Colossus is a once-in-a-lifetime experience that, thankfully, has now spanned multiple console generations upon reaching its potential.